Now, welcome to another Thor Thunderous Ramble, or Thor Thunderstorm. I haven't settled on a name for this quite yet. But anyway, it's just going to be me answering a bunch of questions off the cuff, no script or anything, and hopefully doing it in a somewhat timely manner. And these questions, of course, have come from all of you. I have clipped out any questions that start with "Hey Thor" over the past week or so, and I will be more or less picking some at random and then answering them. And obviously, I will not be able to answer every single question I have got. There were, once again, a ton of them, so thank you so much for that. And there will be questions about all sorts of different things, though I did sort of separate out questions about the Acolyte, and I think I'll start by picking a few of those before moving on to some other topics. And the first one of them came to us from Northling, who asked, "Hey Thor, I get the feeling that the line about Jedi not drawing a lightsaber tries to get across about the right idea, but botched it. A lightsaber is supposed to be a lethal weapon, so it should only be used if one is ready to inflict lethal violence. That does not exclude using it to inflict lesser wounds or just as a deterrent, but the wording sure makes it sound like that. It also seems to ignore other lightsaber utility purposes, like as a cutting tool or as a torch. How do you think a Jedi should use a lightsaber and when they should draw it?" And yeah, I do agree that a Jedi can and will and should use a lightsaber for all sorts of different reasons. Certainly, they are good cutting tools, or they can melt their way through a door, or you can stab someone and, they'll be fine 10 minutes later. All sorts of different things you can do with a lightsaber. But seriously, I think the scene tried to make an interesting or good point and just kind of failed or didn't present it well. And I'm speaking about the first scene in The Acolyte here, about the fight between May and Master Andara when May is like, "Well, you pulled a lightsaber, so now you're willing to kill me." And we see, of course, later on in the same episode even, we see Yord pulling out a lightsaber pretty much all the time. And so I saw a lot of people kind of making fun of this. Well, you're kind of defeating your own point here. But a couple things to keep in mind is, one, that Yord is kind of presented as not the brightest Jedi ever, and also not exactly the best Jedi ever. So him always pulling out his lightsaber first is kind of showing us or telling us he is hot-headed, or he's not exactly doing it the way he should, right? Because I do agree that a Jedi should kind of default to trying to subdue a hostile target first. They should default to martial arts or whatever else it might be. But there comes a point when, if that's not working, if I'm fighting another Force user or dark side user, whatever you want to call May here, I probably have to pull out my lightsaber and be willing to do what I must here. And so that's what I think May in the show is trying to say. That's the point they're trying to make when she pulled out her lightsaber in the middle of a literal fight, and a fight that is obviously quite intense, that Andara is saying, "Now I am going to kill you if I have to, if you do not submit or stand down, whatever." So this is all part about making a point about when a Jedi should actually use a lightsaber while in combat, and part to show that Yord is not a very good Jedi, for better or worse. So I get what they were trying to do with it. Again, it is kind of muddled. It doesn't seem to come off very well, and I understand why people laughed at it. Alright, and next up then we have a comment from Max Ezekiel, who said or asked, "Hey Thor, I find it weird that no one has pointed to this yet, but when the Master says an apprentice kills without a weapon, he's most likely referring to a long-term plan of killing the Jedi indirectly, like Sidious ends up doing. What are your thoughts on this?" And I think that would make sense if he were kind of saying, well, we need a plan to indirectly defeat the Jedi, because it's not like we can just, with a lightsaber, kill all 10,000 of them. So if we sort of break the order from within or undermine them, which Palpatine ultimately does, that we can defeat them all at once, in a manner of speaking. So yeah, that would make sense. However, in the episode, the Acolyte, May, whatever we want to call her, she is literally trying to kill Jedi without a weapon. This is a task that has been set forth by her master. So much like with the first thing with the lightsaber and how Jedi only use it to kill, or when they need to kill, that's the only time they pull it out, we again have this sort of mixed or muddled message that it doesn't make a lot of sense. It's not very clear because of other things presented in the show. And honestly, I don't think it's a bad line if it was referring to a long-term plan, but now we see May challenging Jedi to come at me with all your might, and then I have to kill you without a weapon to prove myself, and she's always trying to take their weapons anyway. I don't know, it just, again, it's kind of muddled and it doesn't make a ton of sense. Alright, and let's do one more Acolyte question before moving on, and this one comes to us from Christian Howald, who asked, "Hey Thor, I haven't had a chance to watch the series yet. I might watch the first 3 episodes in a week or so, But from anything I've heard so far, I'm beginning to think this is a little like Fight Club. What if there isn't a twin? What if the twin actually did die in the fire? This causes one of the sisters to have a personality split. Would any of this be possible in how the episodes were staged? Cheers. And there was another question or comment that went kind of along with this that proposed the theory, or someone had proposed, I think a YouTuber had proposed a theory that May has been dead all along and it is a big misdirection and that is going to be the big twist. However, that really wouldn't work because we have actually seen Osha and May. We've seen the two twins at the same time in completely different places, unless some really big shenanigans are taking place and they're messing with the timeline and presenting it as if it's linear, if that makes sense. In which case, if that's what they're doing, then it's not really clever misdirection, it's just deception. It's kind of just flat out lying to you in a manner of speaking. You're intentionally misleading us with false information in order to have a big twist later on. And I mean, go watch The Sixth Sense, for example, and spoiler alert if you're the one person who doesn't know the big twist in that movie, but you can watch the movie and get to the ending and like, how could that be? How could he have been dead the whole time? Like, there were instances where he was talking to people, right? But then you go back and watch the movie again and you're like, no one ever actually reacts to him other than the kid. He was dead the whole time. And so in this instance, if you're trying to imply that May has been dead the whole time, we see her interacting with people, having full-on conversations with people. We see her killing Jedi. We see, again, Osha in a different place at the same time. So it wouldn't be clever misdirection. I'm not trying to just be mean to the show or to crap on it or whatever, but this wouldn't be clever as presented. This would be pretty bad if it is the big twist. All right, and now on to this question from Proamer. I think I'm saying that right. And they asked, "Hey Thor, I was arguing with a friend on what balance in the Force means. When he asked how I know the dark side users are what make the Force unbalanced, all I could come up with was George Lucas said so. I am sure that there are many in-universe examples out there, but I don't remember them. So what are some in-universe examples that might lead us to this idea of the balance of the Force?" And well, Palpatine is probably a pretty good example, if not the ultimate example to give. What happens when a Sith, a dark side user, takes control of the galaxy? Well, he oppresses the entire galaxy. People suffer. It is the ultimate example of why the dark side is bad, why you do not embrace it, and why balance is the absence of somebody who uses the dark side, because they will inevitably do, well, not necessarily what Palpatine did. He had a lot of luck along the way. He was the best at what he did, if you will. But any dark side user is ultimately going to try to take and take and take and take. That is what they do. They are the epitome of selfishness. So that is why you don't need people like that in the galaxy. That is why you do not need to embrace your overly selfish side, your dark side, because you essentially take away from others. And when you get powerful enough like Palpatine, you take pretty much everything away from everybody else, even when it comes down to just free will and choice and the right to live your life how you choose. So if you get into a debate about this again, just say Palpatine. That's really all you have to say. All right, and moving on now to this one from Sergeant AJ, who asked, "Hey Thor, how do you think Ahsoka found out that Anakin had turned back to the light side since the Ahsoka series? She's not as startled to see Anakin as she was in Season 2 of Rebels." I would say it has to be Luke, right? There has to be. I mean, we know there is a sort of first meeting between Luke and Ahsoka where I'm sure all sorts of things got talked about, but we haven't got to see that yet. Filoni gave us a kind of the second, third meeting between the two in the Book of Boba Fett series. I don't know how many times they've talked or whatever. And I think that's a real shame. Part of me kind of understands why you don't have that, because there is a lot they would want to talk about, and I think as fans, a lot of us would really like to see the whole conversation. But where do you fit that into a show that not everybody is even going to understand kind of the context behind this meeting between them? I'm not trying to give a Filoni an out for not showing us the first meeting between the two, but a part of me does kind of understand it. It would probably make more sense in a novel or something where you could just delve into the whole thing, and most people are going to be very forgiving of it. But anyway, yeah, I think Luke told her all about what happened with Anakin and how he came back and all of that. I'm sure those two had a very long and interesting conversation that I would love to see somewhere, sometime, even if it is just in the written form. Okay, and now on to this question from True Soul Dat Dude, who asked, Hey Thor, I was wondering why members of the Separatists don't speak out against the atrocities committed by Dooku and Grievous. I mean, in the Clone Wars show, not all Separatist members were as cruel as Nute Gunray, and it's hard to believe they were completely oblivious to the planets that were attacked, non-provoked by the Separatists, like Ryloth being a prime example. And I would certainly think some probably did or would speak out if the extent of what they were doing was known, and we just don't necessarily see it. There's not a ton of time to really go into the Separatist perspective in the Clone Wars. There's a few episodes where we maybe kind of get it from their point of view or their side, but most of the time we are seeing things from the Republic point of view. And another thing to keep in mind would be wartime propaganda, essentially. I'm sure many of the atrocities that may have gotten out there into the public space of the Separatists, if you will, would be framed as Republic propaganda. This isn't really going on. This is just the Republic trying to make us look bad. I'm sure Dooku would be out there trying to say this is not really happening. It's just them painting us in a bad light. And so, yeah, that would be my guess. It's probably not as widely known as, or believed, I should say, as maybe we would think it is. I'd also say a lot of the time you want to believe your side is the righteous one in a war. And so when you are seeing all these bad things, you're either, again, you're going to swallow the Kool-Aid and believe the propaganda, or you're going to assume there's a reason why we had to do this. All right, and now we move on to this question from Acolyte, probably saying that name wrong too. But they asked, hey Thor, is there any chance you'd be willing to branch out to discuss other topics? I'm confident that a lot of us here would be happy to hear what you have to say regarding stuff besides Star Wars. And yeah, I'd love to discuss other topics if people would be interested in them. I mean, I don't think I'll ever stop talking about Star Wars. I think I'll always be making Star Wars videos of some type, but there's always something Star Wars to talk about, new, old, or whatever it might be. But yeah, if people are interested in other types of videos or other topics, and I'm curious what those topics might be, if people have ideas, I'd love to do it. Also, as I've said before, I do want to do some of my own creative stuff. I'm working on my own story behind the scenes, as well as trying to somehow resurrect my sequel trilogy project, trying to figure out the best way to bring that out still. And so I got a lot going on, and that tends to be my problem. I try to do too much, and then nothing ever gets done. But anyway, yeah, if people have ideas for other types of videos, either Star Wars related or not, yeah, I'd love to do it. All right, and with that one covered, let's move on to this one from Ben Storlebrincat, who asked, hey Thor, I know you get asked this all the time, and I asked a similar question past, but I was wondering what you feel about all this stuff others have been saying about Dave Filoni, and how he is supposedly drunk the Kool-Aid, if you get my meaning. I sincerely hope and want to believe he's just trying to survive and keep his job. Thank you so much for answering my previous question. It was a welcome surprise. And all I'll really say on this is, sometimes you gotta do what you gotta do to keep a job. And I'm not saying that I think that's what Filoni is doing, and I'm not saying I don't think he could be doing that. All I know is that if you want to work at Lucasfilm, you have to play by their rules. You have to play ball with them. So if they are telling him, this is how we want Star Wars to be, well, he has two choices, right? He can either say no and he could quit, and I guess you could say he would keep his integrity that way. Or he can, again, he can play ball, follow their rules, and do what is requested of him, and keep making Star Wars, which is a job he probably absolutely loves, right? I don't know how much I can blame him for following whatever rules may be set forth for him, if you will. I don't know. Like I said, it's a tricky question because we don't know what his true mindset is. We have no idea if he believes in some of the things he says, or if he just says them to keep his job so he can keep working on Star Wars. Alright, and now we move on to this one from Jared Poon, who asked, hey Thor, I'm sure you've gotten this question before, but I'm curious how you feel about Luke and Leia both marrying, as well as a number of other Jedi in the EU. My view on the whole thing was that marriage, love, and emotions were good up until a certain point. You could love and even marry another person, but you couldn't be possessive of them to the point that the world came second after that person. You could feel a sort of righteous anger, but that anger couldn't control your actions. And this is a tricky question, because first of all, you have to keep in mind that Luke marries Mara Jade probably about the time The Phantom Menace came out, if I'm remembering right. And so it's not like the writers of the EU, or Timothy Zahn, really, who had Mara and Luke fall in love, it's not like they knew that that was a forbidden thing for a Jedi. As I've said before when I am asked, like, how do I stand all the contradictions in the EU, or that it doesn't line up perfectly with George Lucas lore? Well, I started reading it before we knew a lot of George Lucas lore. I started reading it before the prequels, And so I am more understanding of it because they didn't have the full context of how the Jedi should be, whereas the stuff coming out today under Disney does have the full context. They can and should try to understand what Lucas was trying to do with the Jedi, and if they don't, that's their fault because they have the information. That said, do I think a Jedi should marry somebody? Well, my view on marriage is that you're marrying somebody because you put them above anything and pretty much anybody else in the world. I love my wife more than anyone else. I would do anything for her. And so if I had to decide between saving her or trying to save the galaxy, I'd probably save her. I would probably be Anakin. I would fall to the dark side for my wife. And I think it would be very hard for a Jedi to want to marry somebody, to love somebody that much. And mind you, again, Jedi can love other people, but to love someone that much almost implies you feel possessive towards them, might be the wrong word, but certainly a strong sense of attachment, right? And I think the only way you could ever possibly have it work is if you had two Jedi marry each other. That way you both have this understanding and maybe can even convince each other, might be the right way to put it, or kind of hold each other to the vows of the Jedi, right? If the world is about to face some kind of great peril, and you both have made this vow to save the world before you save each other, you will understand that, yes, I love you very deeply and all, but we have to give our lives for the world. I don't know if that makes any sense or not, but what I'm saying is, if you're going to marry somebody, you better love that person a lot and be willing to do whatever for them. You better be attached to them, otherwise it's probably not going to be the best marriage ever. Okay, and now we move on to this question from Luke Skywalker, who asked, "Hey Thor, do you think the Clone Wars is an overrated show? The main purpose is to show Anakin's fall to the dark side, but really I think only the Crisis on Naboo arc actually does that well. Otherwise, all it does is occasionally show Anakin get angry, which we've already seen before, and doesn't develop his character or the fall to the dark side any further. As well, some arcs such as The Vanished, the Martez Sisters, the Droids, and most episodes of Season 1 are just bad. There is certainly stuff in the Clone Wars that I love, the takeover of Mandalore, Umbara, the Clone Conspiracy arcs as all top tier Star Wars in my opinion, and Maul, Ahsoka, and Rex are great characters, in the show at least, but it fails to provide a lot of meaningful character development to Anakin, which was what it was made for. Despite this, it's still praised as one of the best pieces of Star Wars content. Some even consider it the best. I'd appreciate your opinion on this, thanks. Also, I would like to see these longer lightning response videos, Thunderous Ramble if you will, in the future." Okay, so I don't know that the Clone Wars was just about showing Anakin's fall to the dark side. I think it was also about just trying to show the Clone Wars that the movies just did not have any time for whatsoever. They start towards the end of Attack of the Clones, and they pretty much end towards the beginning of Revenge of the Sith, right? And so I do think there was room to do more things in that time period that went even beyond Anakin, though I do think one of the things the Clone Wars did well, though I think it actually gets done better in the Tartakovsky Clone Wars, is sort of show the friendship or how they become friends from Master and Apprentice between Anakin and Obi-Wan. I think that's something that, again, the Tartakovsky Clone Wars do better than this, perhaps, but it is nice to see those two being brothers, and we do see that quite a bit in the Clone Wars animated series. As for is the Clone Wars overrated? I mean, yeah, probably to a degree. I think what you have going on here is that a lot of people discovered Star Wars through the Clone Wars. They were very young when it came out, and thus they fell in love with it and have a lot of nostalgia for it. For example, my favorite Star Wars movie is Return of the Jedi, in large part because that is the first Star Wars movie I remember seeing as a kid in the theater. I can now step back today and say, well, it's probably not the best Star Wars movie, but I love it the most. And I think that happens with the Clone Wars to some degree. I also think the fact that it is the first animated show and that it is about a time period that a lot of people were very interested in, again, the Clone Wars, I think that helps it out too. But I think there are a lot of reasons why people look back at the Clone Wars series very fondly. And if we were trying to be completely 100% objective, I think the first two seasons are a little rough at times, but it does get better and better and better. And the later seasons are really, really good. And so it's hard to say, because are we looking at all 7 seasons and trying to rate that? Or are we understanding that maybe it was a rough start because it is the first ever Star Wars animated project or ongoing animated series, maybe I should say. I don't know. It's hard to say. It's hard to answer that question because it is subjective too. Like, you can love it. You can think it is the best thing Star Wars, and who am I to say it's not? Or you can hate it and think it is garbage, and who am I to say it's not? Alright, and next up a question from Mac IE7XU who asked, Hey Thor, so since Anakin brought balance in episode 6 and fans rightfully want to make sure that nothing ruins his sacrifice like the sequels did, does that mean that after episode 6 there can never be darkness or Sith anymore? I want to maintain Anakin's sacrifice, but at the same time, Jedi vs. Sith and light vs. dark are among the best parts of Star Wars in my opinion, so I'm kind of torn on it, interested to hear your thoughts. I think it's all a matter of time. I think, of course, eventually the Sith were going to return and we can do light versus dark, Jedi versus Sith again. You just want to make sure that you're giving Anakin's sacrifice or the balancing of the Force kind of the respect it deserves, I guess. You don't want to be like, well, he balanced the Force for like a weekend. You want to imply he balanced the Force for so much time that people actually got to enjoy the balancing of the Force. That the galaxy was in a very good place for a good amount of time and that people lived happily ever after until something went wrong again 100, 200, 1,000 years down the road. I think we can debate how long the balance should have lasted for. But certainly it shouldn't have been undone in the sequel trilogy in the lifetime of the heroes that helped Anakin bring it about, like the Luke's, Han, Leia, Lando, so on. That should have happened well after they were gone, I think. I think we wanted to wait at least around 100 years before things became unbalanced again. Not that things would be perfect in the meantime. As I've discussed before, my sequel trilogy was going to be about an external threat to the Force itself, not the Sith returning. But anyway, yeah, I think we could absolutely have Jedi versus Sith again at some point down the road. It's all a matter of how long do you want to wait before you do it? How long is kind of appropriate to not steal any of the thunder away from Anakin's sacrifice? Alright, and I think we're going to do one more question here, and again, thank you to everybody who left one, and do keep those questions coming, and I will keep videos like these and the shorter lightning responses coming as well. But this one comes to us from the Fictitian who asked, Hey Thor, I wanted to know what you think of my sort of take on the whole the Jedi are actually bad thing. I feel like that take is simply a misunderstanding of what the prequels and Clone Wars were trying to say. The Jedi way itself is not the problem, it's the flawed people upholding it who don't always do it correctly that sort of makes people condemn the whole thing. The point of the prequels or a storyline like The Wrong Jedi was meant to show that the Jedi as an institution had lost their way, not that they were somehow bad to begin with. I can sort of see it like a religion where, for instance, a representative of that religion could do something very wrong and it shines a bad light on the faith itself, even though it's simply a flaw within the person or organization made up of imperfect humans. TLDR, I think the Jedi way is meant to be something that the Jedi strive for, but not something they always understand perfectly or achieve. And I agree with you 100%. I think part of the problem is, and I touched on this in a video the other day, is that we always tend to see the Jedi at their worst, or when something is going wrong, when they are being undermined, or when they're about to fall, or when they need to rebuild the Order. We never just see the Jedi as they should be succeeding at something. We never get that perfect picture that we kind of hear about when Obi-Wan talks about how, in A New Hope, he talks about how to Luke, that they've been around for 1,000 generations. They've been the guardians of peace and justice for 1,000 generations, which is something akin to 25,000 years. And so that seems like a system that probably works more often than it doesn't, right? But that doesn't mean it is a perfect system to the point where imperfect people can't corrupt it or have something go wrong with it. I do not think there is a perfect system because we people are imperfect. We will always have somebody who tries to undermine something or tries to find a loophole. We have people always arguing what is the best form of government, for example. Well, the best form of government is probably the one where the people are going to try to uphold it and work for the people that they are governing. And I think different governments could probably find success, which isn't to say that some might not be better ideas than others. And I'm getting off track, so I'll just finish this up by saying that, yeah, I think a lot of people misunderstand what the prequels and the Clone Wars and other shows and movies or even books say about the Jedi and try to take that as that the Jedi are bad and here are the reasons why, instead of that the Jedi are good and here are the reasons why these particular Jedi had problems and failed or fell. And with that, I think that's going to be all I got for you this time. Now it is your turn to take to the comments below and tell me what you think about any or all of my responses to these questions, or give your own responses, or leave a question for a future lightning response or thunderstorm video. All you got to do is start your comment off with "Hey Thor" and then ask away. But whatever you choose to do, leave a comment below. Let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, Thanks for watching.